but we will make this recording available to our E4C members. We're also going to be making a key takeaways document available after every meeting. We know y'all are incredibly busy, so we want to make it as easy as possible for y'all to keep track of this work. Let's see. I'll put some questions in the chat as we go. Please engage with us. We're going to try to keep the conversation going in the chat until the presentations are done, and then we will leave as much time as we can for more of a collaborative, open discussion as well. So with that said, I think those are the key housekeeping items. Let me briefly ask each of our executive committee members to say hello. Stephanie, I'll start with you since you popped up a second ago.
Good morning, everybody. Stephanie Matthews with the Texas Association of Business. As Glenn mentioned, I just would only echo that as we've waded into this work, it has not only become the topic of conversation at the Capitol and with all of our TAB members and chambers. Huge issue, complicated issue, but also I will say from a national perspective, glad we have Aaron from the U.S. Chamber here. Nationally, it's come to the forefront, and so it's as big a workforce issue as there is, especially for non-traditional hours. And we're looking forward to each of you participating. Really appreciate it. We can't do it without employers' voice participating in this, and so we're extremely grateful to you all and look forward to working with you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Wendy, why don't you hop in?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Wendy Uptain. I work with Early Matters Texas. We're a nonprofit organization across the state. We work with regions and establish coalitions across many different stakeholders, and business being one of our primary stakeholders that we engage with. And so I'm happy to be here and working on the executive committee in partnership with Stephanie and Kelsey, and also Hope from Texas 2036. So Hope, I'll just pass it right to you to say hi.
Thanks, Wendy. For those of you who aren't familiar with Texas 2036, we're a relatively new think tank that is focused on data-driven solutions for issues that impact every Texan. So I'm Hope Osborne, Director of Government Affairs, excited to be here, excited to see so many of you interested in tackling the big issue that is childcare.
Thanks, Hope. So the four of us, Stephanie, Wendy, Hope, and I meet very regularly on this project. So we're your executive committee. It's really our job to organize these meetings, make sure we're bringing you really useful content that you can really digest and learn from, and then to facilitate the conversation moving forward. So our plan is to have one of these monthly virtual meetings about once a month for the next 5 to 6 months. They'll be increasingly engaging and collaborative in nature. So we're kind of starting with a little bit more of the education, setting the foundation, and then really transitioning into hearing from y'all. What are your ideas? What's your feedback? What are the barriers that you're encountering when you're trying to provide better childcare options and supports to your workers? And then around the summer, the executive committee will really dive into the research and the policymaking process. We know all of you have full-time jobs plus, so we're not expecting you to do that work, but we're going to do lots of research. We're going to bring you ideas, bring you solutions, and really ask for you as our membership to provide feedback and to help us vet these different ideas. All that work will then culminate in about the winter of this year, so that when the legislative session begins in January, we can really hit the ground running from an advocacy perspective. So really our ask of y'all as E4C members is to be part of this process, to tune into these meetings as often as you can. If you can't tune into one live, no problem. We'll do the recording. We'll share the takeaways document afterwards. And then it's really just to be available to provide feedback and to engage in the advocacy process in some shape or fashion once the legislative session begins. And we can get into all of that in a lot more detail later, but just wanted to provide a high-level overview of sort of where we're heading. At this point, I am going to transition things over to Wendy, who's going to be our air traffic controller for the rest of the meeting. But I'm going to drop some questions in the chat. And so please engage with us. drop in your answers, drop in your own questions, drop in your own feedback. Let's make this a really collaborative and engaging conversation. I'm using those words a lot, but that's the theme for the day. So with that, Wendy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kelsey. Maybe to kick it off with the chat, it would be great to hear and have everybody introduce themselves. Just your name, what company you're with, and maybe where in Texas you're located. I get to see the list. We all get to see the list of who is sort of signed up, but we know that this group represents industries all across the spectrum, and we have people, tuning in from all across the state, which is why we're doing this virtually, because it's really hard to do. Yes, it would be great to have these monthly in person, but to bring everybody in from Permian Basin, El Paso, Austin, Waco, Dallas, up north would be really difficult. We hope to be able to do something in person at some point, so we'll keep you updated if we decide to do that. But for now, I think virtual lends itself very well, and also allows us to bring in some expert national speakers like what we have today. So just thank you again for joining us. We really wanted to have this first meeting and start our launch by grounding us really in the economic case for supporting affordable, high quality childcare, both for individual employers, but also for the overall workforce here in Texas. Our goal really with this group is to establish a place for shared learning. So asking questions, there's no dumb questions here in this space. And we're going to be kind of taking this learning journey is what we've called it for the next couple of meetings, and outlining what we've heard and have seen are some of the most important pieces to just sort of ground us in a similar understanding of the space that we're working in and similar language. So today we're really excited that we get to hear from a few national and state leaders about trends that they're seeing in the labor market, why childcare seems to be trending as a top issue for employers. Maybe y'all are feeling it. And also to hear some examples about how companies are seeing an ROI when they've been able to focus on childcare supports for their employees. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Actually, I'm not going to share my screen yet. I realize I have one slide to introduce Jeanette Ward. And instead of doing that, I'll just, we'll be able to see Jeanette. This is the delicate balance of doing this virtual meeting is you share a screen, then all of a sudden we lose sight of the people. And the people are the heart of all of this. And Jeanette, we want to be able to see you. So I'm not going to share the screen that just has your little teeny picture when we can actually see you. We're happy to be joined here this morning by Jeanette. Thank you. She's the CEO of Texas Mutual. We're looking forward to hearing from you, share about your experiences, both as the leader of this large company in Texas, but also as a working mom. So I'll pass it to you, Jeanette.
All right. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here today, and I'm glad all of you are here. I'm very passionate about this topic, and I'm going to tell a story today about why. But first, a little bit about Texas Mutual. So I'm the president and CEO of this wonderful company that I've worked at for 30 years. We're the leading writer of workers' compensation insurance in the state of Texas, and we serve almost 78,000 businesses, and there are 1.5 billion employees across the state. And we have about 1,000 employees located in Austin, Dallas, Houston, and Lubbock. So we're a large employer, and then we also serve a lot of businesses in the state of Texas. We were always, because we serve so many businesses, we've always been interested in workforce development and workforce availability. A couple of reasons, having a well-trained workforce equipped to do their jobs, it's going to be safer. So we like that from being a workers' comp insurer, but also just knowing that if our employers have the workforce they need, it's good for our business too. It's good for them. It's good for the whole economy. But I first became really aware of and interested in childcare as a workforce issue about 10 years ago. And it started at the Texas Mutual front as an employer. And it started when we were going to build our new corporate headquarters in the Mueller area here in Austin. At the time, I was over our claim department, and we had lost a couple of really key adjusters, and that's an important position in the insurance world, to a competitor who had a child care center on site. And at that point, it was just a pure competitive, I wanted to keep my good employees issue that that when we had a chance to build our building, we thought, well, let's have on-site childcare as well. And that was sort of our first step into it. And it was kind of from a competitive position. And so we moved into our new building in 2018, and we had our new childcare provider on site. Very high quality, and their costs kind of match the quality. And then we just really served as their landlord. And the extent of our involvement was providing cheaper than market rent to entice them to come be part of us. Around that same time, I attended one of those economic development events you go to downtown, and a study had just been done that showed that Austin was a childcare desert, and that there weren't enough childcare centers, and there weren't enough quality childcare centers. And more importantly, there were not enough childcare centers that accepted children from low-income families who are on subsidized or tuition assistance. And I was really shocked by that. I was super surprised. And I have a personal reason for why I was shocked. So when I moved to Austin over 30 years ago at the age of 18 to attend the University of Texas, I had my 1-year-old daughter in tow with me. So I was a young single mom. I moved to Austin. I worked part-time jobs. I put myself through college. I graduated. I started working at Texas Mutual as a receptionist, raised my daughter, and then 30 years later, I'm the CEO of this company. And I was able to make it work. There was affordable housing in Austin at the time. I had no problem finding affordable quality childcare. So that's why I was shocked, but that was over 30 years ago. So after hearing all of the data about what was happening in Austin, I went back to our brand new building with our CEO at the time, and I said, wow, I wish I'd known what I know now. When we decided to put a childcare center in, we would have done differently. We would have done something to make sure that there was opportunity for those kids on the waiting list to get care and do so much more. So at that point, I also, and another kind of side note, the reason I got kind of so evangelized about this issue was I know that if you put the same me, the person that I am and was able to accomplish in today's Austin, there's no way I could do it. So I became very passionate about helping people who need a chance to be successful in life. And that's where I really kind of drives my passion for this topic. So that's also why I got involved in Early Matters Greater Austin. So I'm not only the president of this company, but I'm also serve as the chair of Early Matters Greater Austin, a business coalition that we've been working together for a number of years now, focused on trying to make change and advocate for early childhood development in the Austin area. And really bring that business voice, much like you all are doing, to help us at the statewide level. So fast forward to last year, when our wonderful childcare center tenant approached us about expanding their footprint because they had a whole lot of kids on the waiting list. And we said, yes, we will provide you more space. We moved our employees on the first floor up to the upper floors of our building. But we said, we'll also give you 5,000 free square feet of space if you will do the work it takes to get to be able to work with the state of Texas and accept kids on the waiting list for that subsidized or tuition assistance care. And they gladly said yes. I was so happy. They were like, yes, we would love to be part of the solution. And we love this innovative approach to providing more care for more kids, especially those that need it the most. So right now, we've moved our people up. There's construction happening downstairs. They're expanding the playground. And hopefully here in a few months, we'll start seeing more kids around the building, and then they'll start accepting those kids that, like I said, need it the most from a tuition assistance perspective. So I'm really happy that all of you are here today. That's the Texas Mutual story. That's, one of many things I know a lot of employers are doing to find creative solutions. But again, it took me, it had been 30 years since I'd had a kid that needed care. Once they get into school age, it's easy to forget. But our employees are dealing with really real issues of lack of affordable quality childcare, and it's really affecting the workforce. So I'm happy to be a part of this work with all of you. And I look forward to hearing from everyone today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeanette. As you even said that around the wrap up of like, we know that this is impacting the workforce. In the chat box, David from Lubbock is telling us a story about how he has a single mom employee who had to bring her 3-year-old to work today. So, you know,
Yeah.
it's like really grounding us in the realities of what everyone's facing right now. So yeah, David, thanks for sharing that. And hopefully we can start
I
solving this
also
for
saw
families.
someone, and I'm not seeing her now, with a little kiddo on her lap
Oh, yeah.
a
I saw
second
that.
ago.
That's Elise and John Russ out of San Antonio. They operate a beautiful restaurant there. So everyone go visit when you're in San Antonio next time.
Love it. I'm in the childcare space. I have 2 kids, but I also I was a teacher in a previous lifetime, and I always talk about bringing the baby in the room whenever we're talking about early childhood education. And so I just feel like go us, because we've like literally brought the baby in the room, and then there are babies in rooms wherever we are across the state this morning. So I just think that's grounding us in the realities of why we're here. So all right. Well, thank you, Jeanette. Thanks for sharing your personal story and also just your perspective as CEO. I find that so inspiring to hear the story of going from receptionist all the way to CEO, but also knowing that that might not be the reality of someone today. Are we providing the sort of supports that someone in similar conditions would need to be able to be successful? I think that's the right question to be asking. So we're going to zoom out a little bit right now. We're happy to have Erin Merchant join us. I'm going to share a screen here. So we've got our deck now. Happy to have Erin joining us this morning from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. I'm just excited to hear from Erin. In your position, you've got this ability to, you get this perspective to sit up and view trends nationally, right? So which is different than what we're seeing in our own experiences, lived experiences here on the ground. And Erin, you're able to, draw connections and pinpoint things that that we maybe can't because of your position at the national level. So we're really excited to hear from you this morning, and are happy to have you joining us.
Thanks so much, Wendy. I'm actually inspired by the precedent that's been set so far. If you're okay with it, we can take down the slides, and I can still deliver that information and just kind of share that that info afterwards. So thanks so much for that introduction, Wendy. My name is Erin Merchant. I'm the Senior Director of Early Childhood Education Policy and Programs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. So as you mentioned, at a macro level, very invested and in tune to this issue at a micro level as a father of a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old who may or may not have been the reason I was a little bit late to join this call. I am also very invested in the ways in which we can expand access to affordable quality childcare. A little bit of background as to why the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation are so invested in and prioritizing this issue. In 2017, we released a brief called the Business Case for Childcare, which seems kind of cute now, but at the time, we wanted to make an explicit reference to how important access to childcare, access to quality childcare is for the strength of the American workforce. And the report was called Workforce of Today, Workforce of Tomorrow. People need to get to work now. We also need to make sure that our youngest kids are getting the skills that they need and the foundation laid to be, the workforce 10, 15, 20 years down the road. I joined the chamber almost 3 years ago now. So in 2021, and we saw nationally a shift in the perspective of childcare as a workforce issue. It was sort of a generational shift, something that would usually take decades. That happened in a matter of months. And it's because childcare was upfront, it was CEOs, it was essential workers, it was top to bottom. Folks either didn't know where to take their children, they didn't know if they could have their kids on a work call, which is another reason that I feel very fortunate to work in this space, because nobody bats an eye when I've got 1 or more kids on screen. And so it was sort of a grassroots and a grass tops movement all at the same time. We were hearing from CEOs, what are we doing about childcare? And we were hearing from individual employees within the chamber saying like, hey, I don't know what I'm going to do with my kids. And then as the pandemic at its sort of like worst part has receded, what we are seeing is that because of childcare's unique economic structure, which is something that we'll get into in subsequent calls, but it's not a sector or an industry that's going to bounce back like you know, restaurants or like movie theaters. We thought movie theaters were dead, right? And now, you know, we go to the movies on the weekends. And so we have seen that ripple effect from childcare already being a fragile industry to a massive impact like the pandemic. And then now being on the other side of the pandemic, we are seeing the after effects of that on the American workforce. And so currently at a national level, we're seeing that there are somewhere north of 8 million open jobs, but we have around 6 million unemployed capable workers. And so even if every single person who was able to work in America, and I do want to, for almost like legal reasons, I want to point out that is not the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's goal, is to get every single person into the workforce, but we do need a strong and capable workforce. But even if that were the case, hypothetically, we would still be 2 million people short to meet the needs of the current American workforce. And that has issues with national security, with international competitiveness. And the reason that we are seeing from the Chamber's perspective over and over again, I mean, there's there's immigration issues, there are skills attainment issues, but something that comes up over and over again, and there's a growing chorus of people citing childcare as the reason that they either cannot join the workforce, that they have to pare down from the workforce, or the reason that they left the workforce and their return is TBD. And we've seen the massive effects that this can have. And I mean, it happens in individual families, it happens in towns, but when you look at the national picture, the cost, both in terms of the economic cost, but also the human cost, because of those skills, that perspective, but also like your retirement savings, things like that. When people drop out of the workforce for any reason, but especially for childcare reasons, which should in theory be a very fixable problem, that has ripple effects that kind of shakes the foundation of entire economic pillars. And so we look at it from sort of three different angles. We look at it from the individual employer angle. And so we're looking at how can we help individual employers meet their employees' needs? You know, is it flexible hours? Is that even an option? On-site childcare, you know, backup care, things like that. We look at it from a state and regional lens, because every state, I mean, you're Texas, right? Like you don't need me to tell you that, like, you talk to one state, you've talked to one state, right? And Texas, in many ways, it's sort of its own country in size, in population, in all the different cultures. And so we're not going to come in and be like, you know what worked really well in Vermont. But we may look at what is Vermont doing and what is Kentucky doing and what is, and I'm actually going to get to that in just a second, but each state and each region needs to find the thing that works for them. So the Chamber of Commerce is also not a huge proponent of sort of one-size-fits-all blanket solutions. And then the third way we look at it, and this will again be a topic that we talk about in these monthly meetings, but what are sort of like state and federal policy happenings that are going on now, whether it's coming up with policies, whether it's supporting policies, but what are ways in which the business community can be aware of, and to what degree are they able to participate in some of the innovative programs and policies that are happening? For some companies, it's going to be diving all the way in and being like, we've come up with a solution. For some companies, it might be just joining the chorus, keeping up the drumbeat of, we got to do something about childcare. I'm not a professional childcare provider. I'm not a professional legislator. All I know is that we have to do something about this. And that adds value to the conversation when the folks who can do something about it hear that over and over and over again. So some light touches on things that are going on around the country. You may have heard about this in Michigan. They first piloted and now are statewide expanding something called the Tri-Share program. And so that was a collaboration of chambers of commerce and employers, childcare providers, and policymakers. And so you have a central hub that acts as the liaison between those groups, and they've dedicated public funding and employers opt in. And so the Tri part of the program implies that so the employer pays for a third of the cost, the parent pays for a third of the cost, and the state pays for a third of the cost. And so that was an opportunity to address both access and also affordability. Kentucky saw that and they said, we don't know that that's the exact model that we're looking for. But we also know that Kentucky absolutely has to do something about childcare. And so they came up with a program that kicked off last summer, where if an employer provides a certain amount of like a stipend, a voucher, they have kind of different names for it for each business, but some sort of financial support to an employee for their childcare costs, the state will match that amount. In other states, whether it's Colorado, whether it's Illinois, they are looking at what are the barriers of entry for childcare providers. And they created a state office that's the Office of Early Childhood Education or the Office of Childcare. Whereas like my home state of South Dakota, it's sort of like, okay, well, you got to go talk to the Department of Education, got to go talk to HHS, you have to. And so even just consolidating, where do I go if I'm a provider, if I'm a parent, if I'm a business owner, where do I go to learn about childcare? Oftentimes just having it in one spot moves the ball forward. And so I'm thrilled to be part of this group, excited to be working with the different members of the executive committee, and excited to both in terms of the Q&A for this call, future calls, and also if I've touched on something that folks would like to have a one-on-one conversation about, please don't hesitate to reach out. So thanks so much, Wendy.
Thanks, Aaron. We had kind of planned for this morning for each of the speakers to talk, and you guys could chat in the chat box. We'll have time for questions and just discussion and reflection afterwards. And so just wanted to kind of put that out there. If there's things on your mind, to go ahead and put that in the chat box for now, and then we'll have a more like candid, fluid in-person conversation after we hear from our final speaker, who is Sara Redington. Sara, thanks for joining us this morning. We're grateful to have Sara Redington here. She's here to speak about Best Places for Working Parents. Some of you may already be familiar with that name. Best Places is national, but they got started and they're based here in Texas in Fort Worth. And Sara, we're really looking forward to learning from you. You guys have some fantastic data about the top research-backed family-friendly policies that are beneficial for employers to be implementing. And so really excited to learn from you and see some of the data that you all have been collecting.
Awesome. Thanks, Wendy. Let me try to share my screen, see if that's going to work this morning. All right. Can you see my slides? Okay, great.
We can. You're set.
Awesome. Thank you all. I'm so excited to be here and talk a little bit about sort of the business case for family-friendly and childcare supports through the Best Place for Working Parents. And really what Best Place for Working Parents is, as Wendy mentioned, is a growing national network of business leaders proving that family-friendly is actually business-friendly through the top 10 policies that have research to prove that they benefit not only working parents, but businesses' bottom line. And really, I'll tell you a little bit about how we got here, what Best Place for Working Parents is up to today, and then some trends and stories from the network. So why Best Place for Working Parents? So about 9 years ago, we started hosting multi-sector convenings in Fort Worth. So we were bringing together business leaders, healthcare, nonprofit, philanthropy, higher ed, government to talk about what is a whole community approach to education starting at birth look like for Fort Worth as a community and for our future economic development. And the business community really quickly stood up and said, you know what, we really believe in the ROI of quality early childhood education and childcare, and we want to build a strong future workforce. What can we tangibly do today to bring that vision to life? And as we were looking at the data in Fort Worth, we actually have the second highest share of families with children in the US. But nationally, those trends were similar, right? The nature of the workforce was changing. By the way, this was all pre-COVID data, which I'll dive into post-COVID data here in a second. But most families are dual working households. And because of that dynamic, the needs of today's workforce are changing. Not only were we seeing a majority of those opting out of the workforce were due to childcare challenges, we also saw that, highly credentialed women that were dropping out of the workforce, 73% of those would have stayed if they just had access to flexibility. So we saw this as a bigger, yes, childcare is the crux of the issue, but there are some other policies that potentially could alleviate that burden. And then thirdly, sort of employers, as you all know on this call, know better than anyone how difficult and costly it is to attract and retain top talent. So we really landed at family-friendly practices and childcare supports inside of businesses. Their own policies could really be transformative, not just for those working families and those children, but really for the businesses themselves and for our economy as a whole. That, of course, was we actually brought 100 business leaders together in Fort Worth in 2019, had 6 roundtable conversations from Fortune 500 companies all the way down to the mom and pop shops on Main Street to talk about family-friendly practices, what they were doing today, and what they tried that didn't work to create this first of its kind online business self-assessment. We launched that in January of 2020, right before COVID hit, and couldn't have foreseen how relevant this conversation would become. As we saw COVID driving down women's labor force participation rate to an all-time low, today we've actually seen that rate spike beyond where we started before COVID, and we see that family-friendly business practices are helping lead that trend. And this isn't just good for families, as I mentioned, and working moms, but employers that are implementing family-friendly practices are benefiting as well, because they're still, this is a current number, losing $23 billion a year in productivity costs due to childcare challenges faced by their workforce. So those that are getting ahead of this are actually reaping the benefits, and we'll talk a little bit about tangible ROI for businesses in just a second. So back in 2021, we actually surveyed 852 working parents from across Texas to ask them, what would it look like post-COVID to get back into the workforce? And none of this data is going to surprise you all, but 80% said they would leave their current job for a different one if they had better family-friendly supports. Depending on whether they were looking to get back into the workforce or currently in the workforce, those working parents almost all needed full-time childcare 5 days a week. But what was also interesting are the other top policies that really surfaced as critical for working parents support. So flexibility, paid time off, child care financial assistance, remote work, and parental leave all topped that list. And the good news was we actually, all of those policies that you see here were included in our top 10 research-backed policies that we launched in 2020. So we felt like we were on the right track for not only supporting working parents, but also businesses. And so what is best place for working parents? It really is these top 10 policies. We took those anecdotal stories from Fort Worth businesses in 2019 of what was working, and then we combined that with the research nationally to cull it down to just the top 10 policies. Again, all of these have research to prove they benefit businesses, bottom line, in addition to working parents. So I'll talk a little bit about our most recent two of our most recent reports, but diving down into the ROI just for a second, are Making the Connection report we published this past fall. And that was really talking about small and micro-sized businesses. So we surveyed and interviewed 50 small and micro-sized businesses across the US for this survey with SMU University that helps head our research. But we're proud that over half of our designated companies are small and micro-sized businesses. And so we really started with small to say, this actually isn't just for large size businesses, small and micro businesses can benefit as well. And you can see here some of the associated business outcomes that came from this study were pretty significant for healthcare benefits, more likely to be a high performer. I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can see that flexibility, maternity leave was a huge one when you're talking about businesses experiencing higher performers if they offer maternity leave and feeling like a more supportive workplace. Childcare assistance and obviously on-site childcare, which we'll dig into in just a bit. And even those associated outcomes that weren't directly tied to business, we can still deduce that having healthy, happy employees is going to be good for business overall. The other report I'll dive into quickly is our National Trends Report that we put out each year. We just released this at the end of January. And again, the reason we look at national trends for family-friendly practices is 2/3 of children under the age of 6 have both or the only parent in the workforce. And actually 75% of the workforce are caregivers in one respect or another. So while we talk about best place for working parents, a lot of our top 10 policies, excuse me, really benefit the continuum of caregiving. So whether it's elder care or others, these benefits can really be advantageous for a lot of different kinds of employees. So very high level trends that we're seeing from National Trend Report this year: family supports, childcare benefits continue to grow. Actually, very encouragingly and surprisingly for us, on-site childcare has grown faster than any other benefit in our suite of policies. Now, that's still a very small minority of businesses in our network that actually implement on-site childcare. That's about 13% of the network, but still that growth is encouraging. And then you can see the ROI for businesses that actually do make that investment, but also backup childcare and childcare financial assistance, any kind of subsidies that Aaron was mentioning before, also give businesses great gains. Flexibility and remote work are going to be here to stay. They continue to increase. A vast majority of our designated companies offer flexible schedules and remote work, and the employees and businesses benefit from that with sort of more productive and more engaged and motivated employee base. So I'm going to transition to end with just a couple of actual stories from our network to illustrate sort of what this looks like on the ground. The first is Sigma Pro, which is a small engineering firm right outside of Fort Worth, and they have been family owned. So Vivian Allen was their HR director at the time, and she reported to her dad, who was the CEO. They were at dinner one night talking about what would they do with this big old building at the back of their engineering plant. And her dad had a great idea to really turn it into a top of the line conference center for their clients. She decided to survey the employees and see what they thought about that. And surprisingly, they overwhelmingly said they'd really like an on-site childcare center for their children, not only an on-site childcare center, but one that could cater to their shift work hours and provide off sort of non-traditional hours of care. So Vivian pitched this idea back to her dad. He said, let's do it. And 8 months later, and $110,000 later, they had a high quality childcare center built out completely for their employees. Not only today have they garnered $150,000 of federal aid for that childcare center, but they are serving 50 families that are not only just in Sigma Pro, but also in the community. So they're actually benefiting a greater swath of folks outside of their company as well. Another small story here, when you talk about the ROI of on-site childcare, Vivian will tell you that she had 2 really great employees, Trent and Brianna. They were married and they had been there for forever. And Brianna worked the morning shift. So she worked from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. and Brent worked 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. They had a baby, and Trent was required to do a training for 3 months. And that was the only time the training could happen is that morning shift. So he signed up for the mandatory training, and that same day, Brianna put her notice in because their only childcare was altering their shift schedules to take care of their child. Vivian decided, once she understood the story, she was going to say, well, what would it take for our company to cover, their childcare for 3 months? She calculated that at $175 a day, it would be $2,000 for 3 months of childcare for their family that would retain these longstanding employees, which she said, to roll the dice on 2 new employees that have been there forever would be way more expensive than $2,000. So for that investment, she was able to retain 2 top employees who now are able to, who actually utilize Sigma Kids, which is the on-site childcare center, and are so grateful for that service. American Airlines presented at our national summit a couple of years ago, and they have a unique workforce. So the chief HR executive would share with our network that, when you have pilots that need to be in the air and flight attendants and desk clerks that need to be checking people in, there is no flexibility or remote work options. So they had to be creative with the benefits that they offer. What they do offer is a $5,000 pre-tax dependent care FSA that can be put towards a host of childcare to be frank. It can go towards a nanny, it can go towards summer school tutoring, it can even go towards elderly care. So again, talking about that continuum of caregiving benefits for your workforce. But she shared with our National Summit attendees that this has actually been incredibly beneficial, not just for her workforce, but for retention of those that they seek to retain. So 40% of those that use their dependent care FSA are pilots and flight attendants, and they have been able to retain those two critical sectors of their workforce for a very long time, 19 years and 20 years respectively, as the average length of time that they've kept those on. And she attributes it very much to this very awesome policy that they implemented based on employee feedback. And the last story I'll leave you with is Rogue Architects, which is a small architecture firm. They had a couple of moms that were coming back from maternity leave that were a little bit nervous about what that looked like post baby. They decided to spend, $375 to redo an internal room in their office to make it what they called a Zen room. It had a refrigerator, all sorts of pump supports that mothers might need, a phone in case they needed to check in with their childcare or nanny. And within a year, they are proud to report that they have over 35% of their employees have stayed longer than 5 years, which breaks industry standard by a lot in the architecture industry. And they attribute that to really being responsive. And again, this was a very low cost sort of innovation that they did locally, but it really rang true for their employees, and they felt extremely appreciated, felt more confident and secure about coming back to work. And so just another sort of example that across the network, from all micro all the way to large businesses, there are solutions that impact how mothers and working parents can come back to work, show up as their whole selves, and feel supported and motivated to be a part of a workplace. And I will stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to you, Wendy.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you for sharing all of that and the examples. I always find that so compelling to just hear from different industries. I also want to just sort of acknowledge the chat box, which I know you weren't monitoring, Sarah, as you were talking. We have a lot of restaurants and sort of after hours, non-traditional hour care on the call. There's a reason why you all are here, because you are feeling this this pull and this need around childcare so intimately. And the needs are different for, for smaller companies versus like a big corporation, and the solutions are slightly different. So, I guess I had I want to transition that maybe into a question for you, Sarah, and Aaron, Jeanette, around what you guys maybe have seen or are seeing around trends for non-traditional hour care. So Sarah, I'm curious if you've seen any of your best places are restaurants and maybe what you're hearing from them. And then Jeanette, I know that that Early Matters Greater Austin just conducted a non-traditional hours study. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure. I'll just chime in to say, absolutely, it is different for restaurant and hospitality. And what we've seen in that industry is, what we like to say is, when you can't do flexibility, predictability is a nice version of flexibility. So for those, even restaurants that can publish, if any of us have been a server in our lives, that they usually publish the schedules the night before, maybe, that whether you're going to be working that weekend for the next week. Those restaurants and hospitality industry businesses that are able to publish that schedule even 2 weeks in advance have seen that their employees are able to better shuffle and arrange for childcare. And it provides it really is kind of a game changer. And it seems like a no duh kind of a move, but we've seen that those employers that actually institute that is really beneficial for them and their employees.
Yeah, Early Matters Greater Austin, we did do a study and really able to kind of come up with some of the same conclusions. It's not an easy thing to solve, the non-traditional care issue, when the traditional care model is so severely broken. Adding to that, how to solve the non-traditional care, but coming up with a lot of the solutions like Sarah mentioned, and then potentially, taking advantage of shared services, or really funding at the end of the day, is what we need to help with a lot of these issues. I think no matter how creative we try to get, it feels like we just need some help funding this to make it something that's a business model that'll work.
Can I hop in too really quickly, Wendy? Because I see a lot of my members sharing similar concerns. And I think, we have to acknowledge that staffing is such a huge challenge right now. I know many of my members are probably thinking, I would love to share my schedule in advance. Problem is I don't have enough people to work. And so I don't know what that schedule is going to look like, right? And so we've got a bit of a chicken and an egg problem here, right? And so part of what we really want to do with this task force is look at how do we shore up the childcare industry? How do we create more slots so that for children who qualify for subsidies and tuition assistance, in many instances, what we're seeing is one, do they know about that program and can they access it? And two, even if they can, is there a giant wait list or is there a shortage of providers who will even accept that subsidy, right? And so we've got to do some work shoring up that industry so that we can bring more people into our industry and create more predictability and more supports, right? So please know that we know it's not as simple as, just give your employees predictability. You've got to have the employees to be able to do that. And so that's why we've really got to dig into some of these root causes and figure out how do we address those challenges so that we have opportunities to get our kids in that childcare supports that they need.
And Kelsey, can I just jump in real quick? Because I think it's a really important case study that occurred in COVID. We were able to secure a very large sum of money to provide working families with a stipend to cover a significant cost of childcare for a period of time. And the pandemic, I'm sorry, I probably still have a little bit of brain damage over all of the work that happened in that period. But we were so excited to be able to award this money, and it almost all went unused. And so there's also in that entry level or that first, I would say, rung of a communication of even how to navigate the system. And so when you have this, at this point, it was really this incredible amount of money to give to families to get them back to work, to pay for the cost of childcare. And in the end, I think 70% went unused. That shows me there's also just a disconnect of how we help working families in Texas navigate the system. And at the same time, we are not graduating or even certifying enough early childhood educators in our state. And when you do, and I came from running a college that had an early learning program in Illinois, and we graduated more teachers than even the University of Illinois, and we were very proud of that. But then we sent those employees into a sea of their own environment, having a lack of benefits, not the wages that would sustain them. And the turnover is extraordinary. So I think our education partners in the state of Texas are a big part of this conversation, is how can we certify more of these individuals, have the cost be affordable for them to be able to enter the space. And then what are the retention items that a state like Georgia, we've been digging into, provides an incentive for these early child care teachers to also include, increase their tenure. I think that's also really important, as Kelsey's raising, is the supply side we also need to figure out, because I think there's some things we can do creatively, but also with our state partners to figure out how to make that funnel of workforce be able to take all these children in that are coming through the system, because our growth is not slowing down, and a majority of the folks coming and landing each day in Texas are under the age of 5. So it's really just going to exacerbate where we are today.
And Emily, if I could follow that up, Kelsey, going back to what you said about, the providers, NFW has many childcare providers who are our members, and I hear from them all the time. And I hear a lot about the Texas Rising Star certification program and the requirements, as well as the cost of implementing that program compared to what they get per child, right? And so I think that has to be looked at again and maybe adjusted. And also for providers who want to participate in this Rising Star program, it really serves a community that might be lower income. It's very important that, this community is served. But oftentimes the providers can't handle the amount of kids because the reimbursement rates for the kids through the Rising Star program just isn't sufficient after inflation and everything they've experienced. So I have a lot of really worried members, who are providers that are, telling me a lot of concerning things also about staffing. I know restaurants having a hard time with labor shortages right now. so are the childcare providers. And then, there are the flexibility part I also hear about. I hear about from my providers about how, there's a required ratio of kids to workers that they have to have. And so if a parent just comes and drops off a kid, all of a sudden they'll be like that ratio will be slightly off, and then they'll be, in trouble or something. So a lot of these things I think are, good things to look at. And I look forward to doing so in the future.
Absolutely. And for those of y'all who haven't met Sara yet, she's with NFIB, a great partner, and we're excited to have them be part of this work. I think Sara and Emily really highlighted a few things. One of the reasons why we wanted to bring this group of business leaders together is because we have to look at some of these challenges from an entrepreneurial lens, right? It's not good enough to just hope the childcare industry improves and, pray things get better, right? We need actual tangible solutions. And I think sometimes our entrepreneurs are able to bring that practicality, that problem solving instinct to the conversation. And we need to do that with this issue, because if it were easy, we would have already figured it out, right? So that's where we've got to be creative, and we've got to be honest about where those challenges lie. So Sara, really appreciate you adding that context, because if our childcare providers can't be financially successful, then they can't stay in business and they can't serve the employees that we need them to serve. Wendy, what else from the chat should we highlight? Or we can also just open it up. Does anyone want to raise something that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, I want to flag, I see Aaron with his mic off. So Aaron, I want to make sure you've got a chance to sort of respond. And then I do have a question, but.
I just wanted to share two quick examples, and not to be prescriptive, but just as sort of a case study in the restaurant business specifically. And I'll drop this in the chat, but we had a great conversation that we recorded with the proprietor of Dick's Drive-In Restaurants in Seattle. And they are a family-owned chain. I think they have like 6 or 7 locations in kind of that greater Seattle area. And not that this is possible for every restaurant, but one solution that they kind of came up with was that after a certain amount of time served, an employee had an opportunity to take up they call it a scholarship at Dick's Drive-In. And for folks who maybe didn't have kids but were looking for higher education, maybe they wanted to take part-time classes, etc., that scholarship could be used for higher education. For folks who had kids and also wanted to pursue higher education, you kind of split the scholarship. But if you were at the point where your number one cost or your number one priority was finding care for your kids, whether it was after school, whether if your kids were under the age of 5, this scholarship was available. And in the video, it says the exact amounts and things like that. But one thing that the Jasmine, the CFO of Dick's Drive-In, was really passionate about was meeting the workers where they were. And so unlike some different sort of subsidization programs, they didn't ask any questions in terms of who is being paid. Like if a grandparent was taking care of your kids because you had to work the brunch shift and non-traditional childcare wasn't even available when you had to work, then that stipend could go or that scholarship could go to your neighbor, to your grandmother, or if you did have a more traditional, maybe whether it's a family childcare home or a center, those funds could also go to that. And she found that to be, it's still a program that's in place, but she also found it to be a helpful bridge for parents who were maybe at the time utilizing friend, family, neighbor care, and their preference was to have maybe like a family childcare home. And so it sort of like helps you make sure that you have someplace, and then the person who is taking care of that kiddo has some sort of compensation while you find maybe a more permanent approach. And then to the point of we need to shore up the childcare industry as well. 1,000% agree. And on top of that, something that other states, especially sort of more like conservative leaning states, have started to take up are different ways that you can sort of kind of Swiss cheese, like every policy might have a couple holes in it, but if you add enough policies on top of each other, you can start to address it. I had mentioned Kentucky earlier, and the chamber in Kentucky had been a huge proponent of that sort of like stipend matching program. And then on the heels of that, the early childhood advocacy community was able to explain, we have a ton of childcare providers who are qualified, who want to be providing this service, but can't because they have kids and they either can't find or can't afford or both childcare. And so right now in Kentucky, they're piloting a program where if you are a childcare provider with a baseline level of qualifications, childcare for you is paid for by the state. And it's because they have sort of peeled back the onion far enough where it's like, okay, well, we're losing folks to our workforce. Well, why are we losing folks? They don't have childcare. Why don't they have childcare? They don't have teachers. And so I know that sounds very common sense, especially for the group that has joined us today. But the difference between sort of leading folks there when you're making this argument versus like, we need to pay childcare providers more, kind of a knee-jerk reaction from people as well. A lot of people would like to get paid more. I mean, the restaurant industry, like we need to pay folks who work at restaurants more to retain, recruit talent, etc. But if you sort of start with here's the crisis and then peel back kind of far enough, and that's how in the state of Kentucky they were like, you know what, you're right, we can't have childcare providers leaving the childcare industry because they can't find a place for their kids to go, because like Sara said, it comes back to ratios, it comes back to dimensions. And so just wanted to highlight those two sort of case studies where on sort of both sides of the issue, folks are kind of getting creative and looking for ways to bolster both workforces.
Love that, Aaron. Especially digging into the childcare workforce is one topic that we really want to look at as part of this task force. Things like their childcare needs, their health insurance needs. That's another thing we hear about a lot that a lot of us in the restaurant industry can relate to. You know, a lot of these providers are very small businesses, and we all see the health insurance quotes you get as a small business. And so you can imagine the healthcare options that these providers have for their employees, or the lack thereof, right? And so, yes, in a perfect world, everyone would make more money and that would be great. But are there other sort of creative things we can look at to strengthen the childcare workforce so that we have the workforce that supports the workforce, right?
I wanted to jump in kind of back to the non-traditional hour care, because I think that there are examples across the state where employers are partnering directly with providers to try to figure out solutions. So I'll share an example up with some partners and friends in the Amarillo Panhandle area, where there's a dairy up there, and they have people on staff working, all 24 hours. And there's a provider nearby who does the majority of the care for the workers there. And the dairy, leadership kind of said, hey, can you start offering like later care? We need evening care and into like late evening for our workers. Can you provide that? And her response was, yeah, I'd be happy to, but I can't get educators in the classroom to stay late because the pay that it would require, they could make more working for you at the dairy for those hours than staying here at my center. And so they realized they were starting to like compete for the same people for better pay, essentially. And I know right now they're in conversations, like there was an idea thrown out of, well, could the provider actually become part of the dairy? Could they actually be part of the business where they all of a sudden it starts to level out entry level pay, and then the provider would be able to then take on some of the other components, like you were just mentioning, Kelsey, around access to healthcare benefits, because there's all of a sudden it's part of this larger employer. Lots of conversations still to be had with their board around that. But I think that's a really good nugget sort of example of where you've got a real company working with a real provider to hash out the details of like, we want to try to do something together. How do we actually make this work? And so, I think for us with this task force, I think, yes, definitely tackling these policies. We want to do that. I also think to the extent that we're able to surface good solutions that you guys or people that are implementing, those are the beginnings or the seeds for good policies, right? If we can take something and that is working, or that you know, employers and childcare providers are able to latch onto, legislators love looking at real world examples like that, and love being able to push for something that they think that people would actually be beneficial and people would jump onto and take advantage of. And so I think identifying those types of ideas are going to be really beneficial for our group too. So I just wanted to put that out there, as you guys are part of the task force. You know, keeping an eye out for those types of ideas will be good for us as we move forward through this process. Okay, with that, I mean, I'm going to turn over to you again in a minute here, Kelsey, but just wanted to make sure we had time. I know we've had folks chiming in the chat box, but if folks had any other questions for our presenters, in particular for Jeanette or Aaron or Sara, about what they saw or heard, want to make sure we've got time for that, and that you guys all feel like you get to voice and speak and come off mute on this call, because that's what this is. This is a group, and we want us to all be able to talk together.
Hi, this is Janie Burkett with the Biscuit Bar. Do we have, Emily, I know in a thing that we were at, well, a while ago, maybe a year or so ago, you were throwing out some statistics that I thought were really powerful about what they're doing in Florida to make childcare affordable, specifically from the certification of the cost of certification and how they're certifying the employees, as well as like where we in Texas rank as far as like childcare cost ratio to median household income or whatever that was. Do you guys have any of that data handy off the top of your head?
I've learned working with Kelsey, unless I have the stat in front of me and it's been verified, that I can't throw it out. You can imagine. So I don't have them handy, but what I would say is happy to share broadly with the group. When this, you know, I remember standing on the Capitol steps, thanks to Wendy and her group, and speaking to, you know, majority of women that were running these childcare centers and getting incredibly passionate about the role that business plays, and having a number of them come up afterwards and say, to be honest, when you first walked up, we thought, what the heck is this lady from restaurants going to help us with? And then all these folks descended into the Capitol, and every single organization had a different message. And it struck me at that moment, talking with Kelsey, that we were all going about this in different directions, and working the legislature, you know, having them understand what we all needed. It was much easier just to kind of tune this out, because we didn't have a clear single message. Like, this is what we're going to do from the business, the policy, the community, to help solve the problem. So that's where this was born out of. But then that provoked us to go look at some other states that we had been, you know, I guess, you know, really brought to our attention, like Georgia with their retention element they put into place, with Florida figuring out how to create more opportunities through their community colleges and independent organizations to certify early learning teachers, but to do it much, much faster. Because one of the things we were hearing a lot about was the cliff we were about to come across when the federal funds ended and these childcare centers had to close. We talked a lot about statistics of what is the impact of not solving the problem, not just for businesses, but also for the future of Texas, when north of 30% of children, you know, can't read in the 3rd grade. And so we started to extrapolate all of that, and I can pull a lot of that data back. But I think what we heard today, especially from the chamber, is that there are lots of states doing different things that are working. We are Texas. I like to believe that we can have the best solution. So we're going to go back and look at a lot of that evidence, I think, in this group, and a lot of those models, and maybe take pieces or parts to come back with one set of plans or ideas. But there's no doubt that we today, especially I'm looking out at Austin as I sit here, we're going to have a really big crisis on our hands that seems to be growing by the day, because we don't have the infrastructure to support the continued growth of the industry. We just came out of a meeting. Glenn was there, many of us, Kelsey, talking about the number of companies moving into Texas. And believe it or not, the number of companies that are not choosing our main cities, but they're moving out to our rural areas. And that's where we have an even bigger childcare crisis. And so, I'm happy to pull those, won't quote them directly because I'll get in trouble later. But there's no doubt that all of the evidence speaks to anecdotal as well as data that this is a problem. And so thank you for asking that question, but you can probably tell in my voice, this is something I'm super passionate about because I keep hearing that people don't want to come back to work. And it's not that they don't want to come back to work. They're making a rational choice for their family based on the set of circumstances that we've given them. And so we have, as a business community, really, it is our, I think, ethical responsibility to help solve this. And it's not just asking businesses to pay for it or the state to fund it. There has to be other solutions that this very smart group of people can come up with.
And I'll add just briefly, one, this is what happens when you hire a lawyer is your number two. But also, just to kind of give a preview of things to come, our next meeting is really going to drill down on what does Texas's current system look like? We're not going to get in the weeds, but we think it's important to kind of understand what is the system we're trying to improve, right? And then subsequent meetings are going to really drill down on some of these other examples from other states. So really grateful to have the chamber's support, Sara and her organization's support, right? We're Texas, we like to do things differently, but we're also not afraid to take other ideas and make them better and make them work in Texas. So we're going to really dive into those topics, Janie, in the next few meetings. And really come out of that discussion with, as Emily said, a united front of here's what we think will make a difference in Texas from the employer and workforce perspective.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for that answer. Just one last quick question. Do we have anyone identified on the political side yet to sponsor whatever we come up with here?
We have ideas. Oh, Stephanie, you can jump in there.
Yeah, no, well, I just a couple of things. The short answer, Janie, is not yet. We definitely have had some folks in the Capitol reach out wanting to learn more about what we're doing, which is super exciting, and really actually in strong leadership positions over there. So again, we're cautiously optimistic at this stage. I think the way that we're approaching it is as we get closer to whittling down some of the solutions we're talking about, then we'll really start targeting elected officials. And of course, we're going to need all of you guys to help with that process once we get there. But I will echo what Kelsey said, and Emily certainly, that there are, we not only need each of you, but there are wonderful examples in Texas, and I'm thrilled that so many of our chamber friends are on. I wanted to ping, I've direct messaged Renee Earls a few times because I think what they're doing in the Midland Odessa, like there's the Permian Partnership, that I believe is really interested in this, but she went off camera. I've emailed her and all of this as well.
Here I am. I'm sorry. I wasn't even
Hi, I
reading the
didn't mean to
chat.
put you on the spot, but I did mean to put you on the spot. So Renee runs the Odessa Chamber and is just a marvelous leader in that community. And we put you on the spot because I know you guys are interested in this and we're thrilled that you're a part of this. So just would love for you to take a couple of minutes to talk about what you guys are doing. And thank you.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, we are the heart of the energy business. So we have workforce issues like no one else. Midland, our counterpart, has the lowest unemployment in Texas. And yet we have many groups coming into, many projects coming into the Odessa Midland area who are looking for literally thousands of employees. So, and there are several on the call who can join in on this, but Odessa specifically, we're just now coming around, our employers are just now coming around to realizing that we too are a child care desert. Midland has done an incredible job with several of the larger energy companies who have built child care facilities for their employees and have done that with independent companies, very similar to what we've heard today. So I've taken great notes on what I've heard today. I hope that you all will make the presentations available for us. And I understand there's a There will be the recording available, because I think this is something that we can really benefit from. West Texas is often a little bit late to the game, late to the party. Everything comes to West Texas a little bit later, but we are our industry is impacts the state, the nation, and the world. And so we have a pretty big impact on legislative issues too. So we hope we can lend some voice to policies that will be made. The Permian Strategic Partnership, as you referred to, is an incredible organization like no other. That is, I believe, about 25 plus major energy companies that have come together and have literally invested billions of dollars in the Permian Basin and parts of New Mexico. And workforce and childcare are two of their major issues.
Well, Renee, we believe that perhaps West Texas will be on the leading end on this one. And we would love nothing more than to really not only just pick your brain, but the partnership, being part of helping develop a solution. Like this literally, I think one of the things I want to emphasize to everybody on the call, we literally need all of you. There's not a one size fits all. That's not the situation, as we've articulated and seen throughout the chat. And even if we're making small strides in the non-traditional space, and then you look at someone like the partnership, the Permian Strategic Partnership, some of the larger companies do have opportunities that some of the smaller ones don't. So we need to make sure that we're addressing both. We're all aware of that. One thing, like just stage setting, we're not going to fix it all in one session. But again, Renee, thank you for that. And just know that we will be utilizing you. And I think we're going to put West Texas, bing,
yay. And we do have some, I'm looking at the list. We do have companies and organizations who are involved in this, but we can get many more involved as well.
That's amazing. Thank you.
I also want to acknowledge Sandy asked a question in the chat box that I think is really relevant for all of us and sort of maybe underscores why we're here today. You guys can all see this, but he basically said, we all agree childcare is an issue. Like we all are here. Like we all have that as a baseline understanding. But there are all these other issues that sort of creep up that overshadow childcare. And so like, how can we work together to raise the visibility of childcare as an issue? I'll provide my reaction or my thoughts on that, and would love to hear others' thoughts as well. But, what I have seen over time is that childcare is always on everybody's priority list, but that there's always something that that comes up in front of it, right? The bathroom bill, right? And I'm talking for the business community specifically, right? And from chambers of commerce, who will put this, childcare's on the list, but then it's, the bathroom bill pops up. Well, then it's this, and then it's community college. And yeah, we're going to champion childcare, but not at the risk of losing the community college opportunity. And so childcare is always there, but the timeliness of other things always pushes it down on the priority list. And I think we have been hearing enough now from employers, obviously Restaurant Association and all the restaurants who are on. We work with companies and businesses all across the state in partnering around early education. And we're hearing it from them in other industries that this is an issue. We're hearing from workforce boards across the state who are saying, we want childcare to be the issue of 2025. And so what I believe is that this group right here, this sort of momentum that we're building is the visibility, is the prioritization that can change the game for the next legislative session. And the last anecdote that I'll share, and Tom Hedrick, I'm looking at you because this is a story I've heard you share, but I've also now heard it myself, which is that TWC, from an agency perspective, the heads and the leads over there, they get to hear from early childhood advocacy organizations a lot that childcare is important, but they have said they do not actually hear from employers that childcare is an issue. And so we need to make sure that legislators, agency leaders, that they are hearing directly from you all, that this really is a problem and that it's a problem that they want their state government to look into and try to solve. And so that, again, I just think that underscores what we're going to be doing over the next few months together and coming up with the what, right? We're all the group of who, but what is it that we want to be asking for, and what is it that what we want to be elevating?
I was going to add too, Wendy, I totally agree with that. And I think part of the reason we haven't had a ton of traction on this issue before is everyone agrees it's a problem, but we haven't seen a lot of great ideas to fix it, right? And so it's hard to get passionate around fixing an issue when you don't know where to start, and it's daunting. But that's why we're starting this process now, is so that we can come up with some ideas that this group feels really strongly about. And that allows people to really rally around something, right? So excited about this work and excited to make it a priority and have all of these different constituencies, right? We just heard from oil and gas in West Texas. We've heard from restaurants. We've got hospitals involved, tech, and the list goes on, right? And so if you can bring those different voices around a set of solutions, that's going to be incredibly powerful. Should I, yeah, we've got 7 minutes left. So I guess I'll jump into the wrap up at this point. First of all, thank y'all. This was a harebrained scheme we had about a year ago, and to see not only so many people tune in and say, yes, this is important, but turn on your cameras and engage in the chat and ask questions and push back and provide feedback, means a lot to everyone on this call who's been a part of this work. So thank you. And please stick with us, because this is going to be a journey. But we're really committed to making it meaningful and powerful and a good use of your time. So thank you. And we're excited to really continue the journey. So with that, I want to leave you with some next steps. We will share the recording and the takeaways document with E4C members. I will drop, well, you have my email address already because I emailed each of you this morning. But I'll drop it here again. If you need those materials, we'll send them directly. But if you have questions or don't get it or something like that, just send us a note. If you haven't officially joined the task force yet, I know we've got some prospective members on this call. Please do join. Wendy, maybe you can drop that link in the chat. Really, any business leader who is not directly involved in the childcare industry is welcome to join. And it's really important we have a diverse group in terms of business size, in terms of business location, in terms of type of industry, because as we've said, there is no one size fits all solution. So we need to make sure we've got lots of voices at the table. To that end, if you're already a member and have other suggestions of who might be an important part of this work, please connect them in. Now's the time. I was also going to drop in the Best Place for Working Parents assessment. Sara, thank you so much for being a partner in this work and all the work you're leading nationally. So that's a great resource for folks. Get involved with your local Early Matters region. You heard Jeanette is our leader here in Austin, and there are great chapters across the state. Obviously, if you're a restaurant, you should be involved in your TRA chapter too. You probably already are. That's how you got here. But just plug for all of the local work that's happening, local chambers of commerce as well. This needs to be a grassroots movement so that we really are connected to the people who are experiencing these challenges day in and day out. I think the only thing left is for me to announce the next meeting. Before I do that, I want to pause. Stephanie, Wendy, Hope, did I miss anything? Okay. Well, excited to announce our next meeting is going to be March 4th at 1 p.m. Central Time. We will share that out with everyone, but we had made it a mission to get our second meeting scheduled by the time this first meeting took place, because we know your calendars fill up quickly. Kudos to Wendy for making that her personal mission and getting it done. So March 4th at 1 p.m. Central is when we will all get together again. In the meantime, we'll send out some resources. And if you have any questions, any suggestions, if you're like, you know, we really should dig into this topic more or explore what this state has done, send us your ideas. This is meant to be collaborative. We're not experts in this. We're learning right along with you. But we think there is a terrific opportunity in front of us to really make a huge difference, not only for employees, but for all of the businesses that we represent as well. So with that, I'll say thank you again to all of our speakers, Jeanette, Erin, Sara. So grateful for you taking time out of your day and sharing your expertise with us. And thank you to each of you who joined. It's making a difference, and we're going to get something really amazing accomplished together. So that said, unless anyone has any final red flags, we will wrap up 3 minutes early, and thank you again.